The respiratory system by James D. and Jordana M. The upper part of the respiratory system: the nose, nasal cavity, mouth, pharynx, and larynx. The nose and nasal cavities. Air passes through nasal cavities that are usually warm, so when air gets to the lungs, it is warm and moist. The nasal airways are lined with cilia and kept moist by mucosal secretions. The moisture in the nose helps to heat and humidify the air and increase the amount of water vapor entering the lungs. The moisture helps keep the air entering from the nose from drying out the lungs and other parts of the respiratory system. The mouth. Air can also enter through the mouth. Mostly people who do this have a mouth breathing habit. Mouth breathing is not an extremely common occurrence, but there is at least one mouth breather per family. Mouth breathing can be caused by obstructions to the nasal cavities by a cold. Mouth breathing can happen if you have seasonal allergies as well. The pharynx and larynx. The pharynx. Here the throat divides into the trachea, windpipe, and esophagus, food pipe. There is also a small flap of cartilage called the epiglottis, which prevents food from entering the trachea. The larynx. This is also known as the voice box, as it is where sound is generated. It also helps protect the trachea by producing a strong cough reflex if any solid object passes the epiglottis. The lower part of the respiratory system. The trachea, bronchi, bronchioles, alveoles, and diaphragm. The trachea, also known as the windpipe, the tube which carries air from the throat into the lungs. It ranges from about 20 to 25 millimeters in diameter and 10 to 15 centimeters in length. The inner membrane of the trachea is covered in cilia, which catch particles of dust, which we can then remove through coughing. The trachea is surrounded by 15 to 20 C-shaped rings of cartilage at the front and side, which help protect the trachea and keep it open. There are not complete circles due to the position of the esophagus immediately behind the trachea, and the need for the trachea to partially collapse to allow the expansion of the esophagus when swallowing large pieces of food. The bronchi. The trachea divides into two tubes called the bronchi, one entering the left and one entering the right lung. The left bronchi is narrower, longer, and more horizontal than the right. Irregular rings of cartilage surround the bronchi, whose walls also consist of smooth muscle. Once inside the lung, the bronchi splits several ways, forming tertiary bronchi. The bronchioles. Tertiary bronchi continue to divide and become bronchioles, very narrow tubes, less than 1 millimeter in diameter. There is no cartilage within the bronchioles, and they lead to alveolar sacs. The lungs. Obviously, if we didn't have our lungs, we could not breathe or survive. The lungs are a spongy structure where the exchange of gases takes place. Each lung is surrounded by a pair of pleural membranes. There are 700 million alveoli in the lungs. The lungs give up their oxygen to the capillaries through the alveoli. The alveoli. Individual hollow cavities contained within alveolar sacs, or ducts. Alveoli have very thin walls which permit the exchange of gases, oxygen and carbon dioxide. They are surrounded by a network of capillaries into which the inspired gases pass. As mentioned, there are nearly 700 million in an average adult lung. Here is a picture of the alveolar sacs and the bronchioles. The diaphragm. The diaphragm is a broad band of muscle which sits underneath the lungs, attaching to the lower ribs, sternum, and lumbar spine and forming the base of the thoracic cavity. The diaphragm's job is to help pump the carbon dioxide out of the lungs and pull the oxygen into the lungs. As the diaphragm contracts and relaxes, breathing takes place. Here's a picture of the full respiratory system. Gas exchange. Body cells use the inhaled oxygen gotten from the alveoli of the lungs. In turn, they produce carbon dioxide and water, which is taken to the alveolar and then exhaled. These exchanges occur as a result of diffusion. In each case, the material is moved from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. The top picture shows the blood flowing from the heart to the lungs. The alveoli take in the water and the carbon dioxide and give off the oxygen. On the bottom picture, the blood flows from the lungs to the body cells. The body cells take the oxygen and give off the carbon dioxide and water. The iron lungs. This is the part about our model. The iron lungs, originally invented by Philip Drinker and Louis Agassiz Shaw in 1927 at Harvard University. They devised a version of a tank receptor that could maintain respiration. They devised a version of a tank respirator that can maintain respiration artificially until a person could breathe independently, usually after 1 or 2 weeks. The machine was powered by an electric motor with 2 vacuum cleaners. The pump changed the pressure inside the rectangular, airtight metal box, pulling air in and out of the lungs. The modern iron lungs. Inventor John Emerson had refined Drinker's device and cut the cost nearly in half. Inside the tank respirator, the patient lay on a bed, sometimes called a cookie tray, that could slide in and out of the cylinders as needed. The slide of the tank had portal windows so attendants could reach in and adjust limbs, sheets, or hot packs. Here is a basic model of an iron lung. The iron lungs. These are 2 different examples of them. And here's our project. The iron lung is a large vacuum-sealed machine that a person with polio or another breathing disorder, those more commonly from polio, would use to help them breathe. The iron lung would act as an artificial diaphragm. The billows, which are represented by the bike pump, would decompress and compress the air inside the chamber to move the chest cavity, represented by a water bottle. You see how the water bottle expands and contracts? That is what the chest cavity would look like inside of the iron lung. The person sitting inside the chamber would have their head sticking out of it on the side so they can lie down.